Today marks the 63rd anniversary of the adoption of the Freedom Charter. To mark the event, 2 original copies of the Charter have been officially authenticated. For more, Kirshni spoke to Nick Wolpe.
Nick, you've just held a very moving ceremony at Liliesleaf Farm. Just speak us through the significance of this morning's initiative.
Well, as you know, today is the 26th of June, which marks the 63rd anniversary of the adoption of the Freedom Charter. I think one of the most fundamental documents ever written, and in particular with regard to our liberation struggle and the future of what they wanted to see. So today we unveiled the Freedom Charter as a specifically declared object, which basically means it's now a protected object, just like buildings get heritage status and are protected, which means no work, no alterations, and they cannot be knocked down. So it means that this document will be preserved for posterity. It cannot be damaged, it cannot be tampered with, and it gives the recognition to the document that it deserves as being a significant and important component of our liberation struggle.
Nick, there are some analysts saying that the seminal document has become archaic, even outdated. What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, I'm very disturbed to hear those comments because it then begs the question as whether the Declaration of Independence, the US Constitution, the Declaration of Citizens and the Rights of Man, which were in France, 1789, the French Revolution, whether those documents, which were crafted within a context of a revolution, of trying to create a new society, a new order, are not relevant. And we know that the US Constitution, which emerged out of the Declaration of Independence, just like our Constitution emerged out of the Freedom Charter, is still pertinent and is still relevant and is still applied today. I don't believe we can talk about the relevance of documents because they fell within a particular epoch context of how they emerged, how they would develop, or time. The point is, what is the message that is being conveyed and articulated and
is
expressed?
It actually workable in contemporary South Africa at this point? And should the ruling party be using it as a point of reference going forward?
I think it can be workable. It can be applied. It requires political will, dedication. It also requires us as South Africans to start living by the words of the Freedom Charter, of starting to understand its core meaning, its core values. If I can give one example within a historical context. The Freedom Charter says, we, the people of South Africa, want the world to know that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black or white. And that came alive at Liliesleaf, and it is highlighted by a particular story of the 10-year-old snitch who one day noticed white men and black men talking and shaking hands, and for him that was highly unusual. He went home and he told his parents, and they took him to the local police station, and he was told the next time he was at Liliesleaf to write down the number plates. But the important thing is that there was interaction between individuals not predicated on the colour of one's skin, but on the content of their character, as Martin Luther King articulated.
Nick, how do you feel that the majority of South Africans today relate to the Freedom Charter, especially seeing that we have a new generation of South Africans who have a very different relationship to the state than their forebears?
Well, I think, again, on the one hand, I don't believe we can talk about the type of relationship and the type of state that we had and that particular type of relationship. We are still battling with some of the same issues and problems. And even the gravitas of those problems to some degree today are much worse than they were pre-1990. And that document, the Freedom Charter, speaks to those particular issues. One being the question of land. The other being the question of South Africa being a multiracial society. So I don't believe that we can discard the Freedom Charter because of the epoch in which it was written is not necessarily, in the eyes of some people, relevant and prevalent to today's conditions. The reality is the conditions today are relevant as they were then.
I want to quickly touch on something that you and I have discussed on the desk before, and this is the marginalization of history at our schools. Now, the Basic Education Minister very recently told us that history will become a compulsory subject at school level within the next few years. Just your thoughts on that, because we are looking at a younger generation who feel some disconnection with their own uniquely South African history.
You're right, there is a disconnection. And again, it ties up to the whole question, the debate around social cohesion, nation building. And that disconnect has materialized to a large degree because we have allowed the history to fade, the history of our past. And if we relate it to the Freedom Charter, if we really understood the meaning behind the Freedom Charter, these sorts of discussions about whether the document is relevant, whether the document is only pertinent to a particular period which was a revolutionary period, would not be discussed because we'll be looking at the words, the meaning of that document. And what is also very concerning is how that document has been misinterpreted, been manipulated to further particular political agendas which don't necessarily speak to the Freedom Charter and what it actually means.
Well, that's where we leave it for now. More news at the top of the hour.
Good night.